All right, welcome to our new stream we've got going on here. We've got a new guest today with William Faucher, and we're going to be talking about Unreal today. And it's a different type of stream than usual because we're like 6 hours earlier, and we have a different crowd, so it's like a whole new game for me right now. And we have this special new guest display happening as well, so it's a whole whack of cool stuff going on today. Anyways, so we have Will here, and he's got a nice following on YouTube with a whole bunch of really useful tutorials about how to use Unreal, and very knowledgeable in Unreal. So we have lots of good information we can tap from him. And as I take a look at my chat here, I'm realizing how tiny my chat is. Oh my goodness. So how you doing, Will?
I'm doing great.
All right, we can hear you too. That's good.
Great to be here.
All right, and just as soon as you said that, all of a sudden, an extra person showed up. I don't understand what happened there. That's awesome. Just to add to the complexity here. Not sure what that's all about. All right. Let me see if I can get myself over to the chat window a little better here. Oh, I know what happened.
All right.
And did you want to talk about some of your background a little bit? Will, just give yourself an introduction.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm William Faucher. I make Unreal tutorials here on YouTube, or on YouTube. I've been working in the industry for since 2008, 2009, so like 12-ish years now. Started off working in games. I started off in a very small indie studio, worked there for about 5 years. And from there, it was a great 5 years, a great learning experience. And then I felt I needed to transition into other fields of 3D. So then I did some arch viz. I did some advertising, and then I made my way into film. So then I worked in the film industry since 2016. So it's been about 5 years now that I've been working in film. And that has been a really, really cool learning experience. I think that was actually a lot more fun. That was much more in line with what I enjoyed doing. I started doing 3D because I like games, and then as I got older, I stopped playing video games, and working in the game industry didn't really make sense to me anymore. And having a huge passion for photography, film just made a lot more sense to me, because it was the perfect marriage of both CGI, 3D art, and photography, right? So working in film was an awesome experience because there's so much more focus on. We're focusing less on draw calls. We don't care about polycams. We don't really care about those kind of limitations that you have in games. We just care about getting the absolute best result possible. And that was kind of more aligned with my interests, right? Like no one really wants to worry about polycounts and such, or draw calls or texture resolutions. Like, no, just throw polys at it and throw more pixels at it until it looks good. So that's been my trajectory so far. And so I've always kind of had a foot in Unreal. I started learning Unreal Engine 3 when I was in school. And then after that, like UDK came out. So this was kind of like a thing that came after Unreal Engine 3 and before Unreal Engine 4. And that was the UDK, the Unreal Development Kit. And that was the first time that Lightmass came out. That was probably back in 2008, 2009 or something. I think it was 2008. And so since then, I've kind of, learned Unreal. Unreal Engine 4 came out. That was amazing as well. So Unreal Engine 4 since 2014 or something like that. And throughout my career, even working in film, we had some Unreal Engine 4 projects because, with virtual production becoming more and more of a thing, some productions just made sense to be used in Unreal. So that's kind of how I've been working in film, but still having a foot in the games world. And it kind of paid off because now, like, Unreal is kind of like the new thing, right? Like, everyone's kind of jumping on the Unreal train. So it's a good time to be alive right now. It's really exciting with lots happening.
All right, that was great. I like how you had able to fill in all that time. I was like over here going, "Oh God, I was fixing things and changing stuff." It was good.
I can talk forever. Fix all your stuff. But awesome. Yeah, so now it's a great time to be alive. It's really exciting. There's so much new stuff happening every month almost. It's like a new release. So we have Unreal Engine 5 that just came out last week, and I think in July we have Unreal Engine 4 4.27 coming out, so that's going to be feature packed as well. So we're not done with Unreal Engine 4 yet. Like, yes, UE5 is here. It's amazing. It has its fair share of limitations, which we can probably touch base on later. But UE4 is still very relevant because it's tried and tested. Everything just works. There still has some broken stuff in it, but for the most part, it's stable. I think that's the key word here: stability. So if you're working in production on a major project right now, UE4 is still the way to go. But it's for us, amateurs and people who want to just play around and get some pretty pictures, UE5 is really exciting.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so unexpected that it just came out just last week. So it was like, we were like, later on we'll be able to have a discussion about UE5, maybe months and months down the road. But then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, now we're going to be talking about that now.
Yeah, I was not planning to start making UE5 content until like end of the year, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
And I still actually had like a roadmap. Like, okay, I'm going to cover this topic and this topic and this topic in UE4. I was actually going to, get cracking, get like 3 weeks worth of content done in a few days. And then UE5 just dropped this bomb on us. I'm like, oh, I have a lot more work to do now. Great.
Exactly. I just wanted to say hi to everybody. I'm glad that we've seen all these familiar faces and new faces, or new names, I suppose, show up on the chat. It was funny when we first started. I'm used to having like a nice chat window, but it was like one. I can only see one line at a time. So I've got it all sorted out now. I can see what everybody said. It's nice to see everybody here. If you guys have questions, this is a great opportunity to throw them at us. Anything that you want to kind of add to the find out. Tap Will's brain for a few more things, or if you want us to try something out, we do have it set up so that we can do screen shares as well. So if there's something that you want us to show, or want us to show you with Unreal 4 or Unreal 5, we can get into that as well. I don't know. I guess we should try and figure out what we're going to do now.
Yeah, sure. Well, why don't you tell us about your experience with the engine so far? Like, I know you had a stream last week about it. What's your first impressions been? Because you have a background in game, but you were more like, were you in animation? I think you told me.
That's right. Yeah. And I've always there's definitely a desire, and I think everybody can sort of sympathize with this, where you just kind of want to become the jack of all trades, and you want to kind of learn about everything. But it's just so hard to do. So I usually I know my comfort zone is in animation. And particularly technical animation, so I usually try to make sure that area I've got a fairly decent grip of. And with Unreal 4, it was really neat experience because you went from programmers had to do all your work for you so that you could see your animations to something where you actually had the ability to do it yourself. And that was really exciting because I was able to hey, look at this, as an animator, you can actually do all this stuff. But I haven't really spent a lot of time looking at the Unreal 5 for its animation side, but I'm not really expecting some massive changes yet. I feel like that wasn't really the area of emphasis, but
what are your thoughts because there are some pretty new animation tools, right, where you can do a lot of the stuff in engine, there's this new IK stuff going on, and I'm not an animator myself, so I'm not really sure what because they did feature some new animation tools. I'm I don't know what this means.
Yeah, IK was always possible. It'll be interesting to see if they've made it a lot easier as a workflow, in terms of how you can get the characters to have that system integrated into what it's doing. And I think that might be where there's some interesting elements. But if you put a lot of work into wiring up a character, you could have a nice IK system that predicts the footsteps and stuff. But maybe that's something that we could take a look at. I don't know.
Yeah, sure. That could be that could be awesome for sure. It's it's definitely exciting times. Lots of new features, and there's just so much to unpack. Because now suddenly, I've had a good grasp on Unreal Engine 4 for the past 6-7 years that it's been out now. And suddenly, oh, cool! I'm back at square one like everyone else for a change, which is which is a very unnerving feeling.
It's like, that's not a comfortable feeling.
No, it's not. Like I like my comfort bubble. Like, oh, I know all the things now. I've been through the hellfire production. I've been through like all those rough times and had to figure out all the workarounds and solutions, right? And but now it's like, oh, I have to do this all over again.
Exactly. There was a question there. Is there a way to open up Unreal 4 and Unreal 5 quicker? It took me 15 minutes last time.
I think Unreal Engine 5 is going to be slow no matter what. 15 seconds doesn't seem too bad. But, 15 minutes, my bad. 15 minutes seems pretty slow. Unreal Engine 4 usually opens pretty quick now, though. It shouldn't be 15 minutes. Usually the first time you open a new project, that always takes a long time because it's compiling all those shaders. So once you've kind of opened it up for the first time, it's fine. It kind of loads up pretty much snappier. But UE5 is just slow no matter what. I mean, I'm running with a pretty decent machine. It's like a mid-range PC. So 64 gigs of RAM and RTX 2060 Super with a Ryzen 7 8-core CPU. And, the UE5 does take a while. I wouldn't say it's 15 minutes, but I guess that depends on your specs. It should be, it's worth noting that UE5 should be installed on a very fast drive, so like an M.2 or an SSD. I know a lot of people have installed it on HDDs because it just takes up so much space. But I don't recommend doing that because it's going to be very slow. I think recommend that you have it at least on an SSD, and M.2 is going to be even better.
Yes, that would be my point too. It's all about hard drive speeds when you get into Unreal 5, and the M.2 drives are really, really fast. Like,
they're amazing.
They really are substantially faster than the SSDs that are. It's the cable that's the bottleneck. It only allows 600 megabytes a second or something, but when you actually have it hooked up right to your motherboard, you get like a substantially bigger bandwidth, and it almost acts like RAM. We're getting to that range, so it has a really interesting. It's a bottleneck that nobody usually appreciates, but when you get into Unreal 5 and you just see how long it takes to load a map, it's because it's putting a lot of data off of your hard drive into your RAM and your video memory and stuff. So no, definitely, it's really nice to have. I think an SSD is still good enough, as long as you're not using HDD, like just a typical spinning drive. Like don't. You're gonna have a bad time. It's fine for storing like JPEGs and photos and stuff, but if you're actually doing any read write, for the love of goodness, that just don't do that. So, but for your own sanity. What are the major tools within Unreal for virtual production? While on set, what are the tech pipelines major studios and indie sets have set up? Wow.
That's a complicated question. I think it depends on, there's no real right answer for that. I think it really depends on the project. It depends on if you have like a LED screen setup, are you using the green screen with live compositing, are you using end display? It's a very complex production with lots of moving parts. So I don't really have a good answer for that, unfortunately. Yeah,
that's okay. And neither do I. We need Deepak here so he can give us some answers.
Yeah, he would be a great answer for that.
How good is Unreal Engine 5 going to be for non-programming background?
Great. I mean, I don't have a programming background. I don't know anything about programming. I wish I did. I don't. But for art, I mean, Unreal, that's always been Unreal's biggest strength, is that it's very artist friendly. Even since the days of UDK, Unreal Engine 3, you've never needed programming to make good art. Back in the early Unity days, you needed a programmer to kind of make the shaders and materials for you. There wasn't like a node-based system. There was, but it was like a plugin. It was a third-party plugin. So if you needed to change your materials and stuff, you kind of needed a programmer to do it for you. But Unreal had always had that node graph, and node graphs are just, all things considered, pretty artist-friendly once you wrap your brain around how the spaghetti noodles work.
Yeah. While on set, what are the... Oh, is that the one? What major tools are we using? While on set, what are the tech pipelines major studios and indie sets have set up?
I think that's the question that we answered earlier, wasn't it?
I don't know. There's two questions there. I'm trying to remember which one was the first one.
I think that was very... that's the one I didn't really have much of an answer to. Like the tech pipelines. I mean, like I said, it's pretty broad. It usually starts up with a pre-production, and then you start establishing. The set depends. You have sets that are you have like the combination of the actual physical set with the LED screens, and sometimes it's the physical set plus a green screen, and then you use Unreal to do the live compositing in the background. LED screens are better for this because you get the free. You get free reflections, free lighting, which really helps. Like for the best example is the Mandalorian. I use this example all the time because any shiny object, you're gonna getting the reflection done in CG is really hard. Whereas if you have LED screens shining and reflecting off shiny armor pieces, you get those reflections for free. So it's I guess that's the easiest way to answer that question, I suppose.
Here's a tricky question from Oliver. What do you think Unity is comparing to UE5 and UE2? The new
I haven't used Unity since 2014 or 15 or something. So obviously that's to be taken with a grain of salt. I think Unity is still a great engine. If you want to make games, Unity is it has a very easy barrier of entry because you can prototype games very quickly, very easily. So from a game designer perspective, Unity has always been a little bit preferable because it's not C++ or C#, which from what I hear, Unreal is pretty hard to understand in terms of programming. I can't speak for that because I'm not a programmer, but from what I've heard, Unity is very easy to program on it. But for pure art and pure results, I mean, Unity is hard to compete against Unreal because Unreal has megascans. I mean, that alone, just the fact that Unreal has megascans available for free, that is such a game changer. That is just such an amazing tool set to have because now it's just like, cool, I can just throw together an amazing looking environment in an hour. Whereas in Unity, you kind of have to buy those packs. You can buy the megascans assets, but you have to pay for it out of your pocket. So that kind of sucks.
Yeah.
And but so then Unreal also has just the sheer amount of documentation for it, and it's kind of like the go-to engine when artists want to make pretty work.
Yeah.
It's not Unity.
And Oliver comes from a game design background, so he's got a very specific direction on what he needs in his engine. But
right.
I think we had this debate when we were trying to figure out which way our courses should go in terms of what engines should we teach. And from my perspective, it was always, if you're an artist, the most friendliest way to go is with Unreal because it's made for artists. It's designed to be catering to that need. And when you get into Unity, you hit a wall with having to do C# programming, and it's just, that's the most frustrating part. But I mean, Unity still has its world. It's like, it's definitely got a niche area where it dominates. And I know indie developers and programmers really enjoy that kind of 100%. Flexibility. But when it comes to being an artist, though, it's just like, oh man, you're missing out on so much good stuff when you're not using Unreal.
Yeah, definitely. It's just a lot of the stuff. Like I haven't used Unity recently, so I don't really, I'm not in a good position to say like, oh, Unreal's totally so much better. Unity has come a long way since I think Unity 3 or 4 back in several years ago. I think it's Unity 5 now. That's the latest. I think. Don't quote me on this. So yeah, I haven't used Unity in a while. But that being said, I've seen amazing work come out of Unity. To say that you can't make good art in Unity is false. You absolutely can. I just think you're going to get there more easily with Unreal.
Yeah.
So a good artist is going to make good art no matter what the engine is, no matter what the render, whether he's using Arnold or Redshift, Octane, Unity, Blender, whatever. A good artist can make good art. Unreal just makes that whole process a little bit easier.
I just realized there was some weird bug with my computer, and of course this happens just during a stream, where there was some key that was stuck, or something was going on. Every time I clicked, it was like adding things, and it was like my shift or my control or something. I know, I'm like, why this is happening right now? I think I finally just fixed it, so I'm feeling a little better now over here. There was a question from Sandeep that what is UE5 or how good is UE5 compared to 4? And I mean, clearly UE5 has some huge advantage that is going to really change the industry. And I think that's, you can't, like, even though it's not finished and it's still in progress, it's like that's going to be so big. And like, you can just see it happening already when you watch, like on my LinkedIn stream, you'll see like these videos people are doing and you're just like, Yeah, see, that's so amazing. Like they're taking
Yeah, it is.
amazing things and they're lighting it and changing it on real time. Like everybody's gonna want that. You can't argue
Yep.
that isn't like huge. So
Yeah, I think like UE4, like I was saying earlier in the stream, I think UE4 still has its place now because it's stable. It's stable. It has a lot more functional features. Obviously, UE5 has Nanite and Lumen, and those are the big game changers here. Like Nanite with basically infinite polygons. It really doesn't matter how dense your mesh is. You just keep throwing dense meshes at it, and it handles it like a champ. It's basically LODing your model on a nearly a per pixel basis. It's absolutely incredible. And then you got Lumen, which is very, very good looking real time global illumination, which we had in Unreal Engine 4. We had like the ray trace global illumination, but it wasn't very accurate. It wasn't that good. And so Lumen, it definitely takes things to the next level. Lumen still has its bugs. It's kind of wonky in something, and there's a lot of features that are missing. So for example, Lumen does not work with translucency. So if you have a scene with glass or windows or that sort of thing, it's not going to work. So it's still not quite there yet. It's a little bit unfinished. But so as long as your objects are opaque, and there's no translucency or any subsurface scattering or that sort of thing, it's going to be fine. But as soon as you start, you need those fancier features, that's when Lumen starts falling apart. So you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt there. Whereas in Unreal Engine 4, all of that stuff just works. It's stable. It doesn't have Lumen or Nanite, but you can still get amazing results in UE4. So I think UE4 is still going to be the go-to engine for any kind of serious project-based work. For the next, at least until I would say midway through next year, even like at least for 6 months after UE5 is officially released, because it's still going to be buggy. I wouldn't want to start making an entire game production revolved around an engine that's just so fresh, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no.
So
sure. That's a generally good rule.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we're still going to be. We're kind of this awkward middle where UE5 is technically out, but most people are still going to be using UE4. So like people still need to make content and tutorials and guides for the new UE4 features, which, so like I said, 427 is coming out in July or something, or sometime this summer. So there will be new features. Someone's going to need to make tutorials for those new features. So I'm going to have to make content for both and kind of satisfy both engines.
Yeah, for sure. You just have to kind of learn one and work on the other.
Yeah, exactly. So, but for what I've noticed so far, is Unreal Engine 5 is basically an Unreal Engine 4 version 2. It's very the transition's very seamless, right? Like you don't feel like it's a totally different engine. Like it's kind of like you going on vacation. You come back and your house has been remodeled. You have a bigger backyard. You got a hardwood floors. You've got like your rooms are a little bit bigger as well. You got like a new kitchen. So it's still the same home that you know and love, but it's still it feels fresh. It feels new. It's still like I think that's the best way to put it.
Yeah, for sure. There's an interesting.
Go ahead. Sorry.
There's a question here for production's tech pipeline set up from scratch. Then, I mean, there's so many different pipelines for different productions. That question is so open-ended. But I did find out some interesting information from one of our other mentors that they would have they were using Unreal 4, but they had their own independent in-house pipeline that they managed. That was like a third-party software that you would use to communicate to Unreal, but you would manage it. It's like it goes beyond just what the tools that are come out of the box with Unreal. Like some pipelines inside of a studio can be completely gone in a whole different direction. So it's difficult to sort of understand that until you actually work for that company. And then I guess the downside is if you're an employee, you've spent all your time training in the software that only exists inside of that studio.
Yeah. But that happens in every studio, right? Like every studio has their own workflow. They have their own approaches to things. They have their own tools. Like I can't tell you how because I changed studios. I went from working for a full VFX studio, working in film, to moving into an animation studio. And I was doing look dev, texturing, rendering, that sort of thing. And I noticed that when I didn't have those tools that the previous studio had at my new job, I felt crippled, completely and utterly crippled, because I'm like, oh, this tool that did everything so well, so easily, I don't have this anymore. I have to do it the old-fashioned way. And what is the old-fashioned way? I have no idea what I'm doing. So it's always there's always like an adjustment period when you move from one studio to another, because workflows vary, and not just workflow, but like entire design philosophies, like entire different ways of thinking, changes completely when you go from one studio to another. So
yeah, exactly.
It all depends.
Here's a question about how can we take advantage of Houdini and Unreal 5 combined? Well, I have no idea.
I mean, so Houdini is going to be compatible. I think there's like the Houdini Bridge, or the Curl Bridge. I can't remember what it's called, but there's like Houdini is an amazing, such a powerful tool to know. It's especially doing effect stuff, like combining Houdini with Niagara, which is Unreal's new particle system. The stuff I've seen come out of that is just nothing short of incredible. I really wish that I was more of like a Houdini nerd, because the stuff, it just things that you can never do that in Maya. You can't do that in 3ds Max. It's just so powerful. Like, the Thanos snap when people kind of just disintegrate, right? In the Avengers, you can do that with Niagara. You can have meshes just disintegrate like that, and all the physics and the crumbling and all that stuff. You can just kind of simulate all those things in Houdini and just pop that into Unreal. And it's so powerful. So when I have students asking me like, hey, like I kind of want to learn a new skill, what should I do? I very often point them towards effects work in Houdini.
Yeah, for sure. Houdini is like really interesting, and it's changing and growing so fast. Like it's definitely something that will be something better and bigger in the near future. So it's very interesting.
And someone just said like Houdini looks so confusing, and it really is confusing. It's just the best analogy I can think of is, so think of Maya or 3ds Max as a Swiss Army knife. You can kind of do a little bit of everything with Maya or 3ds Max, but Houdini is the blacksmith that creates that Swiss Army knife. You can actually build everything and anything you can imagine in Houdini from scratch. It's that powerful, and there's a huge learning curve. But once you wrap your head around it, there's a reason why effects artists are paid so well.
Yeah, that's right. That's true.
So,
Pietro wants to know if about the MetaHuman pipeline and if it's possible, future possibilities. And I think there's going to be an optimistic answer to this. MetaHumans, it seems like a very positive thing. Definitely optimistic on that front.
I mean, MetaHuman, I don't think I need to tell you, like, MetaHuman is amazing. It's really cool what it can do. It kind of, but also just killed off a whole ton of jobs, right? Like, and for anyone who was like,
and it has like an amazing ability to LOD down to something that can run on a mobile device, and like, that's really interesting. Like just the fact that the skeleton LODs as well as the meshes, and yet it still plays all the same facial and body animations. There's a huge amount of flexibility. It's kind of misleading because you look at it and you're like, oh, that's never going to run on my machine, but it does actually have all this ability to be flexible.
Yeah, obviously, like the quality deteriorates when you get those LEDs down or to a higher level. But I mean, if you got the graphics power for it, it's pretty incredible. Like getting that in Groom, like the fact that we don't need to worry about hair cards anymore.
Yeah.
The fact that it uses an actual Groom, it's how it should be, because that's what we do in film. We use Grooms, we don't use hair cards. Hair cards are an old games thing. I'm really glad that we're moving away from that. Because having to make hair cards was the bane of my existence in games. Like, it is so boring, it is so dull, and then you worry about like the alpha overlap and then just like the overdraw. It's just no.
Yeah, that's true. It was really amazing that they were able to get that Groom working. I mean, I just couldn't believe that you can do that in real time.
And
it just looks perfect. Really impressive.
It's getting there. It's definitely getting there. There's still some, especially like I'm a bit biased because I'm coming from like a film background where there is so much like pixel peeping. Like, I mean, you'll have like your production managers and your supervisor just like really zooming into like 400 or 500%. Like, this pixel here. No, you got to fix this Groom. It doesn't look good. That's just what they do in film. There's so much pixel peeping, right? And it has to look perfect. And so it's for Unreal, it's not quite there yet. But the fact that it's real time, there's no render time anymore. It's just poof, it's there. Makes it very promising.
It's such a step up from hair cards, though. Like you just
for sure. It works pretty. Like, have you seen the MetaPets thing where they're talking? Just a dog it was for April Fools. And they made like announcing MetaPets, and it was just like some dog talking. and it had like proper groom on the dog and everything. It looked very, very good.
I didn't see that. That's hilarious.
Yeah, you should check that out sometime. It's pretty cool.
JD Smith is asking, why is there a glaring lack of Unreal compositing tutorials? And is that just because it's super new, or is this like a reason?
The thing is, so Unreal's kind of at this weird spot where things are looking very good. You can get very good results out of Unreal. The thing is, it was never built or never designed to be like a renderer, like an offline renderer. That's just not what it was made for. And so I feel like it's missing a lot of tools. It's first and foremost a games engine, and it was never designed to be an offline renderer used for film. So I don't think much of the tools are designed for like getting proper AOVs. So for those of you who don't know what AOVs are, AOVs is just a bunch of series of render passes. So we've got like a shadow pass, we've got like the subsurface scattering pass, the specular pass. And so when we send them off to compositors in film, the compositor can basically just rebuild all the CG with all their render passes stacked up on top of each other. And Unreal doesn't have that. It has some. It has like, motion vector passes. It's got some, AO passes and that sort of thing, but it's missing a lot of the critical, like very high accuracy, Z-depth, cryptomat, all those render layers that you would expect from an offline renderer, but Unreal just can't support that. It's not built for that yet. So it's not because there's a glaring lack of tutorials for it. It's just it's not really supported yet. And so I think that's the problem there. I was hoping that with Unreal Engine 5 it would be better supported, but it's a little too early to say, right? It's an early access, so maybe there's going to be better support for it next year, hopefully.
That's interesting, because I mean, I really have no idea what that pipeline level is compared to like a regular pipeline, but right. I did know that they had like export passes for different types of things, but I've never had any luck with it. So it's interesting to hear that you also don't think highly of that export quality yet. It
can work. It's a lot more hassle than just rendering out AOVs or other render passes in Arnold, for example. Arnold they just work. There's no question. You select the render passes that you want, poof, works out of the box. And with Unreal render passes, there's a lot more finickiness. There's a lot more tampering to do with these files than there would be from a proper offline render. But again, Unreal was never designed for this in mind. I don't think when UE4 was developed, I don't think the developers in their wildest dreams expected Unreal to be used this way. So I think that's the core issue. I think from the ground, it would have to be rebuilt from the ground up. And right. I think that's what they're trying to avoid for compatibility issues. So I think for Unreal Engine 5 to really take off in the virtual production world, it really needs to address these issues. Because if it's going to be taken seriously in film, it needs to have these tools. There's no way around it. And until it does, it's never going to be considered seriously.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting. And is that stuff is that supported in Movie Render Queue now, or is this only just the old legacy stuff?
No, it's supported in Movie Render Queue. And in fact, Movie Render Queue was a huge step up. It makes things much, much better, much more predictable now. So it's a big step up. And like I said, there are some render passes, but it's missing some very important ones, like what's the word? Like shadow catchers or shadow pass. Right now, there's no easy way to get a proper shadow pass, which sucks. So it should be doable, but it's like those small little things, like Arnold or Octane, V-Ray. They'll do these things so easily. Why can't Unreal?
Yeah. Wow. Interesting.
Yeah. That was a long tangent. So next question.
No, that's good. We don't have a whole lot of questions left. So if you guys have more, feel free to throw it out there. Just people commenting on the stuff that we were talking about.
Right.
Yeah. But I don't know. We can definitely jump into some other stuff if you want to. We can get into working on, unless I missed some questions. I don't know. If I did miss a question, just let me know. Throw it up there again. Nice to see we got some lots of people here anyways, chatting.
Yeah, definitely.
Is there anything in particular that on your end that you wanted to share or talk about in terms of anything cool that you've learned about in the last week?
I mean, for the most part, it's mostly been kind of like figuring out the ins and outs of like the new tools, right? And it's, for example, Let's see now. Well, I had it on the tip of my tongue and I've forgotten, of course. Yeah, like Nanite. I've been digging a little bit into Nanite, like thinking like, hey, how does this work? Like, what are the optimization things? And the way that works is just pure genius. I mean, Nanite is one of those things where, I mean, this is going to change everything. I know, like when we were talking about it with another one of our colleagues, saying like, oh my God, no one can use this because it's just going to be so heavy, right? Like games are already running out of disk space. Like they're not going to be able to use this new tech. But funny enough, Nanite, even though it has much denser polygon count, it actually has a lower memory footprint than just bringing in a heavy static mesh.
Really?
So yeah, there was a document on it in the a part in the documentation, which we can include maybe in the description of the video, like once it's released. Reading through the Epic documentation is pretty important because there's a lot of juicy information there, and it kind of explains how Nanite works and how Lumen works. And it's funny enough, like they actually showed the math step by step, and it's really cool to see that, like, wow, like having a 2 million polygon mesh can actually be more lightweight than, a very dense static mesh that doesn't use Nanite. So it's it's pretty impressive.
Because you would have you just have this surface of polygons, but then on a regular static mesh, you'd have to do all like the whole full-on piece of it. So
yeah, well, it's the LOD system, right? So an LOD, like the entire model kind of has to optimize and just like kind of, as soon as the camera moves away a certain distance, the whole mesh is like poop. It just, you see it pop, right? It's classic game stuff. But now chunks of an individual nanite mesh can be, as soon as they're occluded, as soon as like they're no longer in view, those things will just disappear off screen. They won't be rendered anymore. So it's extremely efficient system, and I do think that's the way forward. So I don't know if that's probably what's the word, copyrighted tech or trademarked or whatever. So I don't think any other engine will be able to do this.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's very powerful, and it works surprisingly well. It runs very well on hardware. Like, of course, the performance, like in the playable demo that we got, obviously performance was, not terrifically awesome.
Right.
But moving forward in like a year or two, when graphics cards get even better, I think that's the way forward.
Yeah, for sure. Pretty cool. Do you have any experience in Unreal Audio?
I do not. I mean, I feel audio is one of those things where it's always been done by some poor audio guy who's in the back of the studio and never socializes with anyone. That's all. I don't know what's your experience been in studios with an audio guy.
I was in the same boat. I'm like, and from my experience with working with audio teams is obsolete now because it's changing so much and so fast. So it's like I don't even know what the current pipeline is, but that they've been working with the audio. Like there was a big part in that whole UE5 where they're changing up the audio system, and it looked interesting. But I mean, traditionally in my department where I work, it'd be like the audio team takes care of the audio and they give you the finished piece and then you work with it. It's like it's
always at least in my experience, it's always been at like the end of production, like that last month before we go gold, and it's always just like chaos. It's total panic mode for that poor guy. Like, here we are, like end of production, we've wrapped up our work, we're done, we're just like testing or whatever. And meanwhile, audio guys panicking and just like running around, and it's just like, what
they really are at the end of the pipeline. It's ridiculous. Them and FX artists, they're like in our cinematic team anyways, it's always been like we do our cinematic shot and we're like cutting it down to the wire, and then it's like, okay, VFX, finish the job, you've got 1 day, and then the audio team's like after that. You're like, I don't have any days, how am I supposed to finish this job?
It's a lot like colorists in film. Like the colorist or the post-production team always, it's always everything's on fire every production. And those poor people, there's also a very good reason why colorists are paid so much. Like their technical understanding of color is unparalleled. But they have to deal with so much stress because it's always a director who's very antsy because it has to be delivered to the client in like 2 days. Like, oh, this is not color graded yet. Oh, let's panic. And lots of late nights. But they're paid for it, so they're just crying with like dollar bills, just like poor me.
Yeah, that's so true.
I don't feel too bad for him.
It's like, can you not sleep? All right, then you're hired. Dave asks, are there any world or project settings in UE that either of you seem to always enable, disable that are not there by default?
Any what that are not enabled?
World or project settings in UE.
World
settings,
change. No, but project settings, I think it depends. Obviously, like turning ray tracing on, for one, if it could, obviously when you create a new project, you can choose to enable ray tracing. And if for whatever reason you've forgotten, or I brain fart and I didn't think about it, turning on ray tracing is the first thing I do, assuming you have an RTX or ray tracing capable graphics card. So that's the first thing I turn on for sure. Other project settings, though, I don't think so. Usually things work pretty well out of the box.
That's an interesting topic about the ray tracing, because I was just reading somewhere that it was they're super happy that you don't have to use ray trace anymore in UE5. Are you noticing that as a thing that might be true?
Yeah, it is true. So at least natively in UE5, obviously the big thing is Lumen, right? So Lumen is the new lighting tool, and Lumen doesn't use hardware ray tracing like UE4 did. So Lumen uses a software ray tracing, which just means that any graphics card can run it. So whether you're using an ATI graphics card or just like an older, like a 1080 or something, or even a 970, you can run UE5 because it doesn't use hardware ray tracing. So it's a little bit slower, but not everything is ray traced. It uses some parts of it are ray traced. So Lumen is kind of like a salad of a multitude of different features, all combined in a very fancy package to just make pretty good looking lighting. So it's not path traced. So for those of you who are familiar with rendering in Arnold or Octane or V-Ray, that's just like an unbiased renderer, like fully path traced renderer. Unreal is definitely not a path tracer. It does a whole bunch of approximations and stuff under the hood to make it faster. But at the same time, you're sacrificing realistic quality. So if you're looking for the absolute perfectly physically accurate stuff, Unreal's not the way to go for that.
True. It's good. It's a good point. All right. Actually, I'm very interested to know how to turn on and off ray tracing and that whole flow in terms of what you do in UE4, because I know it's super complicated and there's a lot of random checks, but you're only turning on elements that you need, right? Is that kind of the idea? You only need reflections, so you only worry about that part of it, or is it once it's on, everything is on kind of thing?
In UE4 or 5?
In UE4 currently.
In UE4, yeah. So in UE4, it was kind of one of those things where you can choose ray trace reflection or ray trace global illumination or ray traced ambient occlusion, for example. There's lots of different ray tracing aspects that you could toggle on or off and use screen space stuff for some things and use rasterized translucency for other things. So it's a really weird thing because it's using technically. With an offline renderer, everything is path traced. There's no question. There's no I'm going to disable ray trace reflection. No. Everything is path traced. You don't even need to worry about that. You just place the light, hit the render button, and it renders for you. In Unreal, all these things are kind of in separate passes, done kind of under the hood. So that's you can toggle all those things. But I think that's what people really struggle learning Unreal Engine in general, because it's so weird in that respect. Like I said, in Arnold or V-Ray, you place the light, hit the render button, it's just going to look good. It just works. But in Unreal, there's so many moving parts and things that you kind of need to know about and checkboxes. And it's insane how many hidden checkboxes can make such a drastic effect in your renders in Unreal. Just one checkbox can make the world of difference. Or not just that, the worst offender is console commands. And it's just good Lord, many console commands that you need to know about. That can totally break your render. Oh, cool. Why aren't my trees casting any shadows? Why? And of course there's a console command for that. It's just a long word salad of how to fix missing shadows on your trees. In another renderer, you don't need to worry about that. You don't need to think about why are my trees not casting shadows? No, they're just gonna work. So it's that's one of the things that makes Unreal very daunting to many people.
It totally is. There's so many questions that we get that are I'm having problems with my shadows, opacity, or it's just oh yeah, okay, let's see what we can find to figure that out for you.
Yep.
Here's a question: have you tried V-Ray in Unreal? I didn't even know that was a thing.
I haven't tried it. No. I know a few people who have, and it's pretty cool. I mean, I would love to actually. Should take the time to play around with it because from what I've seen, it's pretty awesome. But I could be wrong. But I think that requires baking the light. I think. So I'm not. Yeah, I haven't used it myself, so I'm not really informed enough to make a proper statement on that. But yeah, from what I've seen, it's pretty cool. But I'm guessing there's a reason why there's not that many people who use it, because if it was that incredible, I think everyone would just jump on it.
Right.
Unless it's a very well-kept secret. That's possible.
Right.
But yeah, I can't really comment more on that.
Okay, cool. How much VR is used in production? Oh, there we go. We got that question.
Ooh.
And I do not know the answer to that one at all, because I just don't even... It's kind of like a virtual production sort of production, or are they talking about VR in terms of making a VR product?
Yeah, I mean, I think VR is still in the early days. I think just now with like the Oculus, it's becoming a bit more affordable to the average Joe. Like maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, you had to get the HTC Vive, which was like, well over $1,000 or $2,000 or something. Now it's affordable, and so I think there's more and more people using VR in production. But I don't know. How about you? Have you played around with VR at all?
It's one of those things I want to do one day, but like I'm gonna wait until I actually have the time to do it. Otherwise, I'll be like not doing anything with it, because by the time I actually if it's just sitting there not doing anything, the next version is coming and it's gonna be far better than the previous version. So I just I don't want to have one.
I think I think for me at this point anyway, it's kind of a fad. Like it's cool, but because I had a VR headset at one point, I bought an Oculus, and I used it for about 2 weeks, and I just returned it because I'm like, it was cool it was awesome those first few days. Like, this is so awesome, just like swinging, destroying stuff, and shooting stuff. And then I actually bought it for development work, for making 3D, because they have a few sculpting apps. So kind of like ZBrush, but for sculpting in VR, and that was pretty cool, but you don't have that tactile feeling, right? You don't know when the brush is actually hitting the surface, and that just makes it oh. And then you get really tired because the thing gets heavy after a while. After an hour of using it, you get really tired because the resolution is not super high. Everything's a little bit blurry. You're trying constantly to focus on something, so it's it's really exhausting to use. You can't work a full day with that thing.
That's the thing. Well, that's what I mean. By the versions too, right? You've got. It's going to get lighter. The resolution is going to get better. It's going to become more independent, and then it's going to be a different experience. And it's just a changing technology. And I think really where it's more interesting is that AR more than the VR, because the VR is a single person experience, but then AR can be potentially a multi-person experience. It solves a lot of those problems of seeing other people. They don't have to turn them into skeletons and stuff. So there's a lot of discussion and a lot of exploring still on that front before it really, I think the mainstream audience can really pick up on it.
Yeah, I agree. I think I think right now the main issue, people don't really know what people enjoy in VR. This is the problem they had back in old video games. People didn't really understand what was enjoyable, what was fun. I mean, we haven't really figured that out yet in VR. What kind of keep people coming back to using the VR, because VR is a great fun experience for the first few days, and then it gets boring really quickly. So I think we need to kind of find that attraction, what really make people get addicted to it, right? And so I don't think we're there yet.
No, I don't. I mean, it's a real hit or miss for sure on that one. And I think from a production tool, it may have some usage in trying to visualize something, maybe as a presentation tool or something, but as a work tool, I think that the problem that you talked about, Will, where you just get really tired of having this thing on your face, is a huge deal. I mean, there's a reason why our mouse and keyboard are minimalistic. We very minimal amount of movement required.
Shortcuts. I mean, I can't work without shortcuts. If I have to manually click a button, nope, I'm not gonna do it. I'm just gonna bind it to a shortcut.
That's right. Yeah.
So
and they would always talk about how you could do these games where you're sword fighting and you're actually physically doing it. That's like a workout, man. By the time you get do that for a while.
I don't want to do that. I want to be lazy on a Friday night and just just shoot people. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think that's one of those things where it's kind of like the Wii, like the Nintendo Wii. It was Wii bowling was awesome for a few hours, and then you're like, okay, this was fun, but I'm done.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the kids like it, but
yeah, definitely.
they got too much energy. That's the problem.
Yeah, and they're fine. They don't have a 40-hour work week.
That's right. Isabel, hey, welcome. I'm glad you made it to this stream here. Apart from missing render passes, what else do you believe real-time is missing for it to be able to replace offline entirely for a production?
Excellent question. I would say consistency. Like when you're working in film with an offline renderer, you need to, for example, every morning we have dailies. We have a daily meeting with the supervisor. We go over the work that was been done the previous day. We update our shots. We say, okay, the supervisor looks at your shot and says, okay, fix this part, nothing else. When you re-render with those notes addressed, nothing else can change. It is absolutely critical that, the rest of the shot that you didn't address, that cannot change it. And it needs to be pixel perfect. Especially like when you're just updating versions, okay? Like, okay, we need to update the resolution. Everything needs to be exactly the same. That's super important. The thing with Unreal is that sometimes renders will look different from one render to another for whatever reason. It's not pixel perfect because of the temporal nature. Like temporal anti-aliasing is not exact by nature. So from one frame to another, it'll kind of shift. It'll look a little bit different. This is one of the reasons why you can't have multi-GPUs in Unreal. Now you can, I think, with NVLink. But at least until recently, you couldn't have two GPUs because with temporal AA, it depended on the previous frame to render the next frame. And so you're going to get some inconsistencies there. And that's what you don't have with offline renderers, like CPU-based renderers. That you render two frames twice, they're going to look exactly the same, right down to a per pixel level. And that's what Unreal doesn't have yet. You get the inconsistencies, and you're like, why? I don't know. The renders will look similar, but they're not perfect. And this is really important with stuff like alpha masking. So let's say you've got you rendered out an alpha path of your character against the backdrop. The compositors, the people and the colorists who are going to work with your shots later in a pipe, they need that alpha masking to be perfect because they've done all their mask and all their fancy stuff, all their roto masking and all their grading based on your previous render, and if things are suddenly different, it messes up with their masking, right? So consistency is super important, and that's what Unreal doesn't have yet. And until it fixes that issue, I don't think it's going to replace Arnold or Vray or any of the other major league players anytime soon.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense when you say it that way.
Whew, I need some water. I've been talking for too long.
That was great, though. I've always wondered about, what is it that's stopping you? But yeah, as soon as you talk about masking, and you're like, it needs to be accurate, I'm like, of course it needs to be accurate. You can't have a variation.
Because there's so many moving parts in film, right? It's not just if you're working at home or for small indie studios, it's going to be awesome because you don't have that level of perfection needed. But if you're working at a big studio like ILM or Framestore or DNEG, all those major films, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in this ginormous moving wheel. You kind of have to expect that perfection. So again, if you're working, for yourself, I'm me, myself in my mom's basement somewhere, making some pretty shots. Fine, who cares? Unreal's plenty good enough. Yeah. And for small studios, it's the same. Small indie studios where small teams with 5 or 10 people, that's fine. But for bigger productions, Unreal really needs to get its shit together. So it's not quite there yet. Don't get me wrong, it's come a long way, and I think Unreal is amazing, but it's not going to replace Arnold or V-Ray anytime soon.
Unless it changes everything.
Yeah.
Very good. Do you think these are good specs for using Unreal? I'm not sure where that conversation came in.
I mean, the recommended specs are they recommend a 2080 with 64 gigs of RAM and I think an i9.
Oh, did I miss it?
So I think that's the recommended spec. The minimum specs, I think they said it was a 1080 with I think 32 gigs of RAM and an i7 or I think a quad core or an 8 core. I think the RAM is the big issue here. A lot of people are trying to open up their PCs or the Ancient Valley scene with 16 gigs of RAM, and you're gonna have a bad time. And they wonder I've had people in the comments in my videos who are just well, why is Unreal 5 crashing? I'm well, what are your specs? And then they just they were using a 20-year-old laptop. I'm well, I hate to be that guy, but you're gonna have to upgrade your PC, buddy.
Right, if you want to use Unreal 5.
Yeah. it is much more demanding on your specs than ever before.
Especially that project. I mean, that project pushes it.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. So you can still open Unreal 5, it's like a blank scene and just keep making your own level, as you would in UE4. That works fine.
Yeah.
But if you're starting to use like nanite and like these super heavy meshes, it's like, yeah, you're gonna need some more RAM, which is the first time I've ever seen the recommended spec be 64 gigs of RAM. I've never seen that before.
I had the same thing. I saw that. I was like, because I remember when the Kite demo came out with Unreal, and they were like 25 gigs of RAM for the Kite demo. And I'm like, wow, really? 25? That's crazy. Like,
yeah.
now it's like, I was like, oh, whatever. 64 is what you need. That was the recommended for the Kite demo, but yeah. It was,
I didn't know that. Yeah, because that came out like quite a few years ago now.
Yeah. It's a while ago now.
Must have been 2016 or 2015, 2016, something like that. So, yeah, like 5 years. Wow, time flies. It's I still use assets from that Kite demo. Like the Kite demo, that hill tree. There's an asset called a hill tree, from that Kite demo that I still use in current projects.
Nice.
It's that good. The assets that Unreal makes are always very high quality.
That's cool. Here's a question about the multi-million poly objects. How would one texture those without something like ZBrush? Because even Quixel Mixer needs unwrapped UVs, which seems hard with millions of polys. There's a question I've heard before.
It's not easy, and I think that was when they said that in last year when they announced Unreal Engine 5. They're like, oh, you can bring your sculpts in directly from ZBrush, and yeah, you can. I think that was purely a tech demo show-off thing, because it does support that, but it's, as you so eloquently say, it's not easy to texture that stuff. I would not want to UV map that thing in Maya, because Maya is just terrible for UV mapping. So it's just slow. 3ds Max had better unwrapping than Maya, but yeah. So I think the whole point of that showing off to show that, hey, look, polygons are not as big a deal as they used to be. And in film, we have very dense models as well, but we use displacement. And displacement is not really supported in UE5, which is a huge bummer. It's just such a letdown, because displacement is just it's so important. You can't.
Oh, really?
Because you can't. It's nice because we often use like displacement maps, and we don't actually like texture paint the super high poly model, right? We just like displace it. We have the high res model and we bake it down. Instead of in film, instead of baking a normal map, we bake a displacement map. And then at render time, the model subdivides like crazy, and then it gets displaced, right? So you're still texturing a relatively low res model. It's probably a little higher res than it would be in games, but it's still pretty pretty low res. But it's not like we don't texture a 5 million polygon model.
Right.
You can, but if you do, you break it up. You break it up into chunks. And then we use a thing called UDIMs. So in games, like a lot of game people are not familiar with UDIMs at all. They're like, oh, what's that? I've never heard of a UDIM. So basically, for those of you who are unfamiliar with UDIMs, it's basically different like texture tiles. So usually in games, you texture within the 0-1 UV space. UDIM allows you to have several texture sets. So basically, you go to 0-2, 0-3, 0-4, and then the 1-1, 1-2, 1-3. They're called. So usually it starts with 1001. And because I've worked on assets that had like 150, 200 UDIMs before. So 200 4K textures on a single asset. Yeah. And so like stuff, for example, a great example is the model in what's it called? Well, Godzilla, for example, probably has hundreds of UDIMs. It's just such a big model that you just need such high res textures. There's no way around it. You're not going to. It's a lot easier to break that up into tiles than it would be to work on a single huge like 64K texture, right?
Yeah.
So we split it up into tiles, and those are called UDIMs. So yeah, so we can use UDIMs on a dense mesh, but you still don't want to have to texture a multi-million polygon model. It's just very impractical.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting that I never considered the limitation of the texture size as well. That if you get into like a range that's well beyond what games can normally support, right? Like it's a whole different ball game all of a sudden with your challenges. Yep. But
so UDIMs are starting to make their way into Unreal now. Like a lot of assets are using that. Unreal should support UDIM natively, and UDIMs are such an awesome way to work. They're very, very practical. You can just paint across UV sets very easily. It's really awesome. It's the way forward.
Do you find? I mean, I had a question about this at the open session just recently. Do you find that like if you have a whole bunch of UDIMs in an asset, like a static mesh asset or something in Unreal, do you find that you run into a bottleneck where you're like managing a lot of materials and they're all very much?
Well, that's the advantage of having UDIMs, is because beforehand you needed to have, for example, a lot of characters were split up into like 5 different material IDs, right? So you had usually had a material ID for the head, you had one for the body, you had one for the armor, you had one for the weapon, right? But now with UDIMs, you can kind of have just one material ID for the entire character because you have UDIMs. Okay,
so it stays within that material.
Yeah, so you only work with one material, but that material has 20 4K textures. So cool. It's more manageable in that respect, and so it's actually a lot easier to work with.
So you have like a whole bunch of texture assets, but you just have the one material that dynamically calls them based on the UV it needs to put it on.
Yeah, exactly. And what's nice is they all work within the same material, so you don't need to have like 5 different materials or a master material with 5 instances. You can have just one material that's just calling it that texture that then calls all the rest of the UV tiles. So it's really, really easy to work with. So it's like one node. So let's say I have my material for my character A. I'll have the texture that's referencing all the UDIMs. So when I have a single, what's it called in Unreal? The texture sample. You'd have like one texture sample for all those UDIMs. So it's super easy to tweak and manage, and it's quite nice.
Wow. Okay.
And it handled higher resolutions as well. So it's
right. Yeah.
Because like I said, you can have 20 UDIMs and it handles it fine because of virtual texturing, which writes a lot of that data to disk instead of running into the GPU's VRAM. Oh. So getting super technical and nerdy here, I don't want to get too deep into that because I'm not actually that smart. I don't actually really know how that all works, but it's pretty amazing how far we've come.
Yeah. And
I remember go ahead, sorry.
Has that pipeline changed in UE5?
I don't think that changed. I think it's the same thing. That kind of became a thing in Unreal Engine 4, I think last year or maybe year before that UDIMs were supported. So I think now that graphics cards are getting more and more VRAM, they're getting bigger and beefier. They can handle all those film tricks that we're using now. So now it's nice to see that film and games are starting to converge a little bit more than they used to.
Yeah, open up the possibilities, especially now that you can actually support all these ridiculous amounts of polygons and textures and everything.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I remember when games had a character would have one 1024 texture.
Yeah, that's right.
And
I know.
I mean, I would have the head would be 1024, and then the body would be a 2048 or something, and we're and a 4K texture. We're whoa,
exactly.
That's overkill, man. This is way too much.
And it was so not that long ago that we were talking
No. Yep.
This is because it's video memory, and you only got so much to show your entire scene, so you don't want to waste it on one asset. You got to make sure you share.
No. Yep. I think in World of Warcraft, they had entire raids that were on a single 512 texture, which blows my mind. That's so crazy.
Yeah, it was all about.
And now we're how 24K textured? Yeah, that's no problem. That's fine.
I know.
So
it's so weird. Everybody was so careful and so clever about how to manage these little small little pixel things and doing packing and all this stuff, and it just seems so.
I don't miss that. That's one of the things that kind of made me want to leave the games industry. I'm I don't want to worry about this. I just want to make pretty pictures, man. Just I don't want to worry about draw calls and all that crap.
Yeah, it's interesting how quickly that changed.
Oh yeah.
Is the ray tracing option when you create a new project for hardware ray tracing? Wow.
In UE5 or 4?
Oh, is it a different answer?
Yeah, well, so in UE5, it doesn't, like I said, we talked about earlier, right? It doesn't, at least with Lumen, it doesn't use hardware ray tracing. So then then you don't need an RTX card. But in UE4, it only uses hardware ray tracing. Now, that being said, I recommend you have an RTX card, but I think there's a thing called DXR, which is NVIDIA's way of basically upgrading their old GTX cards. They're 1080 and older. Then you can get hardware ray tracing, but it comes at a huge performance loss. I'm talking 60-70% performance loss. So I don't really recommend it
Right.
But yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Because you're right, because I think the new video cards have hardware built onto the card just for
Yep.
RTX. So if,
Exactly.
if you don't have the hardware, it has to share it from the resources, the rest of the card.
Yeah.
Which
Yep.
really kills your performance.
Yeah, but fortunately, like Lumen works very well with like a 1080. It doesn't have an RTX chip because it's a very efficiently made software-based ray tracing. And again, Lumen is not 100% ray traced. It uses some parts of it are ray traced, and some are just, yeah, magic, basically black magic, voodoo stuff.
Exactly. Most of it is.
Yep.
How does UE5 impact your view on workflows and the scope of projects? Are there crucial things you see that changes the workflow and scope of projects?
That is a very good question. And also, again, a very open-ended question as well, right? We can kind of speculate as much as we want here. I think we won't really know a true answer to that until we've kind of put it to the test.
Yeah.
And kind of suffered through a production. We'll start off a production with the best of intentions, and then halfway through realize, oh, this was a terrible idea. And then you kind of have to see it through and just finish through. And that's kind of been my experience with the UE4.
Mm-hmm.
Every single UE4 project I've had has been kind of a cacophony of madness. It's just, it started off like, oh god, it'll be so easy. It's like real time, right? It's like no render time. It's like, yeah, it doesn't really work that way. So, but I think
anytime a new tool comes through, like when Sequencer came through, it was like filled with all these weird bugs and issues, and like the pipelines were shifting, but they were still trying to refine and figure out what it is that they were going to get working and where the priorities were. And it does take a while for it to sort of settle out before you can really get it into making a pipeline. Yeah,
we had a production that was revolved around Sequencer when that first came out. Like, oh yeah, Sequencer is really awesome. It works so well. Now we can do all these things. And like, turned out like there were so many issues. Like 50% of the time you rendered a frame with Sequencer, it would just crash or the render just looked like bad. We're like, so like I'm still like, even now, 5 years later, and Sequencer works fine, and the movie render queue works great. Like, it's very consistent and delivers results. But I still have like this inner ball of anxiety every single time I hit the render button, just because like I had these nightmares, these flashbacks of how I would have so many late nights because like rendered like, oh no, like that grass in the background didn't render cool. Or I just have to re-render the whole thing all over again. It's like, oh man, it was. Yeah. To this day, I still have this residual anxiety there.
That's interesting. Yeah.
But to answer the question, I think things are really going to change in the sense that we're not necessarily going to have to spend as much time doing retopo anymore. Now that topologies kind of doesn't really matter. Of course, don't get me wrong. For deforming meshes, topology is very important. But for static meshes, things that don't really move, like rocks and stuff, topology is not that important anymore. Like, you remember the days where you had to have like a perfectly well laid out, perfect quads, everything had to be super nice and no end guns.
Yeah.
And as few triangles as possible. But now it's like, just decimate that thing in ZBrush and done. Or even better, like ZRemesher works really well. So just focus more on the art, decimate it, throw it into Unreal, done. So I think a lot of like asset production is going to go a lot faster with UE5.
Right. Yeah. No, that's interesting. So, I'm not really familiar with the pipeline from ZBrush and how you get like all those, the automated tools of converting that mesh into like something that you would actually work with. But I guess that will basically automatically allow you to have a UV setup and stuff. Like, is that being handled?
So UV, I think there's always going to be. At least for now, I think UVs are still going to be a thing. For sure, you're still going to have to unwrap your model and texture it, right? That's kind of the way it is. But I'm hoping that with Unreal Engine 5, there's going to be better support for what we call procedural texturing. So to explain for those of you who don't really know what I mean by this is when I'm rendering stuff in Arnold, I would say I haven't painted a texture map in a long time. Because you use stuff like triplanar projection, right? You use that. You use a bunch of noises and fractals and grunge math and just kind of project them. There's no UVs because there's all triplanar projection.
Right.
For those of you who use Substance Painter and stuff like that, you're familiar with the triplanar projection. And I do that stuff in Arnold all the time. Now, the only texture we really paint is just like masks. So we'll say like, okay, if I'm doing a character, I'm going to paint like an oil mask on the face. But it's just like some splotches, like a black and white grayscale map of like where I want some more oiliness to be. And then, then I'll just, have that and just kind of combine it in my material. And a lot of the work that we do in film is very procedural because it takes less time to texture paint a hero asset. Obviously, sometimes you need to. There's no way around it. You need too many unique details and stuff on a hero prop, right, or a hero character. You need to go hand paint a lot of stuff. But for many assets, you don't necessarily need to hand paint a whole bunch of things on it. Especially for stuff that's in the mid and the background, right? Like that's just procedural approach and call it a day. Cool. So I'm hoping that UE5 has some better tools for that.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that actually. I mean, they've got this whole new modeling thing with all these like features that do all these things apparently, but I'm wondering where that stands. I've used the modeling tools a little bit, but mostly for like, there's this one part of the static mesh that we need to remove. So I just do it in the engine now instead of having to like go back to Maya, delete it, re-export, re-import in the engine. You don't need to do that anymore. You can kind of just delete it and call it a day, which is great. That saves a lot of time. But I haven't done any of the proper material. The proper like modeling tools from scratch. Yeah.
I don't think it's that practical.
Yeah. I haven't had zero luck with it so far. So I mean, I haven't spent a lot of time with it, but it's just like I'm like, this is not intuitive.
No, exactly. Like, why would you do? I mean, you can do it in Unreal, but why would you? Like, you can run a marathon with no shoes, but it's going to be a lot easier with a good pair of shoes on, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So I'm just going to do it in Maya or 3ds Max and then bring that to Unreal.
Yeah.
But it is nice for like just doing micro corrections on things. That's pretty awesome that you can do it in Engine without having to do the back and forth.
Yeah, yeah. I can
so as Sethriel says in the chat here, like, UE5 needs an accessible curvature shader, and that's a very good point. As of now, like, we use curvature stuff, but the curvature, like basically real-time curvature maps. So have you done any texturing before, Simon?
We covered texturing quite a bit in our courses, so definitely Substance Painter and materials and stuff. But
so curvature maps are like a very essential part of the whole procedural workflow. Because we just use the curvature map for everything, right? Like for edgeware and that sort of thing. You map that out with like fractals and you just noise-based stuff just to kind of break it up a little bit. And that can all be done procedurally with an offline render. But Unreal doesn't have control over that. Not very well. Okay. So like in Arnold, for example, you can just have like a curvature node that just, at render time calculates the curvature and then factors in all the noise that you plugged into it just to break it up. Nice. You can get a nice edgeware shader that's totally procedural. You can slap it on any material and it's just going to, on any object, and it's just going to work. So it's really, really fast to texture and do look dev this way.
It's interesting. But yeah, that's the first time I've heard of that. So there's a lot of learning to do in that area.
Yeah, I mean, the texturing workflows in film and games is totally different.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Here's a thing. This is from a long time ago now, probably. I'm way behind. Sandeep says, would you do a basic tutorial for Unreal Engine? I feel like you would be able to say yes to that, or you already have one or something.
Can you repeat the question, sorry?
Would you do a basic tutorial for Unreal Engine, or a little live session someday for the beginners who are just getting started, or at least tips and tricks video?
Yeah.
Is that covered?
That's definitely
you haven't got it covered.
No, I haven't done that. I mean, I've a few videos of I've done tutorial on Lumen, for example, and I did it yesterday. I had a live stream, making just a very quick Mars type of environment, which I did, which was pretty fun. So that was just a very chill live stream, just very creating a landscape from scratch with a bunch of different of the assets that Unreal provided with the Ancient Valley demo, of course. Because I figured, red rocks, like what other environment has red rocks? Mars is one of those things. So I think the main difference that I did is I touched base on some atmosphere settings. So it's like feel it much more otherworldly than your typical, blue sky, clouds, all that stuff. You can just by changing the atmosphere, you can very quickly totally change the mood of your scene. So that was fun.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, for sure. Louis here. Hey, Louis. That's how far back I am. What are your thoughts on indie games?
Indie games. I mean, I think for indie games, like Unreal is a great choice just because their royalty system works. It favors indie games very well. Like you don't pay any royalties until you've crossed a certain threshold of earnings, right?
Yeah.
So that just means that combine that with Blender, DaVinci Resolve, or like GIMP. There's so many free packages out there. You can make an entire game from scratch for free, no licenses. So that's really, really appealing for indie game developers.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely so much different than it was years ago. Like, it's just so much more opportunity now to get into it and get started. But I guess that comes with a caveat of the fact that there's thousands of games now being released from thousands of developers. That's tougher marketplace.
I mean, I think that's great too. Like, of course, it's a big risk. Like, making a game, I think people just expect, like, oh, I'm going to make a video game. It's going to be easy. And it's like, no, there's a lot more to game development than you might think. It's just, especially like I've worked at the studio I work now, to like, oh yeah, well, we have all these film assets, right? We can make a game with this. It's going to be, very quick. I'm like, no, you don't know what you're talking about, sir. Respectfully.
Respectfully.
It's like once you've worked in game design, you realize there's a lot more work than you might think.
It really is true. It's amazing how much, like, it's just so misleading, because you're like, you're playing a game and you're like, oh, it's nice, I could probably do this. But then, like, it's just so much that happens to get to that point where you can
make a playable level very quickly.
Yeah.
But that's one thing. But making an entire packaged game with a story, a campaign, multiplayer, that sort of thing. And of course, like, the first thing that I see a lot is people say, like, oh, I want to make an open world MMORPG. Like, whoa.
By myself. In my spare time.
Like, how hard could it be, right? It's like, well.
Yeah. So
I mean, there's a reason why, like, companies like Bethesda spend 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years making an MMO, or not an MMO, but they make an RPG, an open world RPG, and it's still buggy. Yeah. So I can't imagine how a team of 3 or 4 people could make something like that.
Yeah. Without some significant sacrifices.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, you really do have to, when you just talk about how big a studio is, 100, 200 people, like, you just, do your job and then multiply that by 100, 200 times and do that every day of the week. And you're like, yeah, I can kind of see why I'm not quite hitting the bar that they're hitting.
I mean, if you're working for 1 year times 100 people, that's 100 years of man hours.
Right.
So it's like, there's a lot of work to do here.
Yeah, it's so true. Sandeep asks, is there back version compatibility with UE5 and UE4? I'm going to say...
I know you can migrate stuff from UE4 to UE5 seamlessly. So that works pretty well. I haven't tried going the other way around, however. My guess is it's not going to work. It's pretty rare that software has that kind of backward compatibility. Like, I know, like, Maya and 3ds Max do. You can open up old Maya files if you save it as a specific type. I don't think you'll be able to do UE5 back to UE4. You can try it, though.
Yeah, I don't think so. It's never really been a thing that you could do, is go back to older versions of Unreal. Usually they're kind of, especially in blueprints, they're kind of like manipulating it so that it's working, but to go back is like a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, like, you're just going to run to, like, oh, this is not supported or whatever. What you might be able to try is, like, just, selecting the assets and copy pasting them over into a new project. That might work. You may be able to migrate certain assets over to an old project, but in the actual, like, level and, everything working correctly, I don't think that's going to work.
Right. Yeah. Audrey's here. Hey. And Isabel's working on a render farm at the moment. So she's doing this. She is actually very much in the VFX pipeline.
Oh man, render farms, those are the godsend. I wish I had one at home. That would be nice. Like, I think that's the one that's the main reason I kind of got back into Unreal last year, because I took a break for a while. I was working in film, I'm working with Arnold, and I love Arnold as a renderer. Like, it just works. It's slow. It's a very slow renderer, but it just delivers results. And what I like about it is that you would think about how things work in real life. You think about, okay, how would this object be shaded in real life with subsurface scattering and all the roughness breakup and stuff, and it's just going to work. It just looks fantastic and photoreal out of the box. But then I had a project in mind, and it would not be doable in Arnold because I have just a very mid-range PC. Like, one frame would take like an hour and a half to render at 4K. I'm like, that's one frame. And I was going to do 24 frames a second, and that's just not sustainable. So that was my reason for kind of jumping back into Unreal. I'm like, oh yeah, things are looking pretty good now, and things are much faster. So like for example, like my Halo video would not have been doable in Arnold because it's just too slow. Some of those shots were like 120 FPS for the slow-mo effect. Can you imagine like 120 frame of rendering times like an hour per frame? It's just not doable.
Interesting.
So that's what makes it makes it a lot more accessible for smaller content creators like myself.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh man, the amount of time you spend rendering slowly, where you just like you don't know that it's gone bad until you've spent hours rendering it.
Oh, 100%. I mean, like there's times where like we put a render on overnight and we come back to daily tomorrow and like, oh, I forgot to unhide a render layer.
There you go. Exactly.
Crap.
I remember those days.
Oh man, yeah, that's it happens. It happens every time, and of course, it always happens like at the very end of production when everyone's stressed out. Right. They've been crunching for 2 weeks. They make mistakes. Like it's just part of the job, honestly.
It's so nerve-wracking too, because like your hours invested. You can't speed that up anyway. It's just like it's just a fixed amount of time. You got to wait until it's done again. It's
a lot of problem solving and kind of like being on the ball. Like okay. This happened. We have fires to put out. What's the solution here? So it just come. It's very creative. I kind of like it because it encourages some really forward thinking and very creative solution to like, oh, you know what? Not the ideal solution, but hey, it works and the client's happy. Done. Call it a day.
Yeah, right. Totally. It's true though. Here's a question of Blender, but I think we're gonna find out that neither of us are very good in Blender.
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you think of Blender's capabilities now compared to the competition? I'd imagine it's still a huge ways to go. Well, that is still an interesting question, though, because I am also wondering what are the possibility that Blender may actually surpass the usage of Maya in the future? Like it just seems to be more and more people are talking about it and using it than I've ever seen before.
I think that Blender is a classic. It's just what we were talking about earlier, right? Where it's very appealing to indie developers, small studios, because A, it's free, and you can make amazing things with Blender. But when we're talking about major studios with a lot of moving parts, with lots of tools and custom tools that have been written and pipeline that have been made over decades, literally decades, major studios are not going to just switch to Blender overnight because there's just too much time, there's too much development time, there's too much programming invested. Factor that in with the having to train all the the hundreds of thousands of artists to learn Blender. It's just way too expensive for what it's worth. Yeah. And Maya is a trusty workhorse. It's just, yes, everyone hates Maya, but it's a classic Stockholm Syndrome case where it's like, yeah, you know what, like we're stuck with it, just kind of deal with it. And I don't think Maya is going to be replaced anytime soon in major studios like ILM, Framestore, DNEG, what have you. That being said, Blender is really interesting for anything that's smaller than that because it's free. Mm-hmm. And can think of the millions of dollars that studios can save in licensing fees alone every year. And in terms of actual what Blender can output versus Maya, I think Blender has surpassed Maya.
Right, yeah.
In terms of actual like modeling, like quality of the modeling tool, the quality of the sculpting tool, the fact you can sculpt, model, sim, animate in Blender, render in Blender, it's an amazing little package. And I think in actual modeling tools, I think Blender is better than Maya, hands down. I haven't really used it much myself, but from what I've seen, it's just wow.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm always interested in because it's like, yeah, you're trying to teach Maya, and you're like, yeah, we kind of know it's a little crappy. Like,
yep,
doesn't have all the greatest features in the world. And then someone's like, oh man, I can get this way better in Blender and do this thing. I'm like, yeah, I know.
Better and faster sometimes. Yeah. But the thing is, Maya is one of those things, again, like I said earlier about Arnold, Maya has the consistency. Version after version, the tools are going to be named the same way. All your tools are not going to break suddenly. It just works. Whereas with Blender, they might rename a thing. They might call it, I don't know, like Cycles X, for example, versus Cycles. And just the fact that you rename things is enough to break your decades-old tool, right? Until you have to like spend more time rewriting that stuff. And so Maya is very consistent. It's safe. It's reliable. And the reliability is what you need in film, especially in major studios with lots of moving parts. So for major productions, again, Blender is not going to be king here.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to the whole even in studios, they're all working on really older versions of Maya because it's that reliability of knowing that it'll work when they ask for it to work, and nothing's changed, no secrets. And,
we all hate it, but it's dependable.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing you need. Like the last thing you want in a production is like, oh, cool, we got this new tool, but it just broke all the renders. Cool.
Yeah.
So
it's like my 2022 is like I'm opening it up and I'm trying to do things, and it's like, oh look, this is a very glaring, obvious problem right now. Or there was a student that posted a question on Slack just yesterday, and they're like, oh, how come my image blades aren't showing up in my viewports? And I'm like, I'm trying it out. And then I tried it on 2020, and I'm like, it's a bug. That's just a 2022 thing.
I mean, I'm still in Maya 2018, and just because it works, right? Like, I don't need any of these new features. Like, no, just give me something reliable, trustworthy, that I know it's not going to crap out on me out of the blue. So Maya doesn't pay me overtime. So.
That's right, to troubleshoot their bugs. Yeah. It's always been very frustrating. But in terms of students being able to access free, student versions and stuff, they have to keep getting the latest ones. So we're always pushing that latest version, and it's always like,
right,
all right, what's the new surprise in this version?
And that's the thing. Like, it affects the teaching experience too, because you can't really help them. Like, oh yeah, I've never seen this bug before. Cool. So it's I think Blender is great for students, especially because it's you understand the fundamentals of 3D, and it's free, and you don't need to worry about licensing. That's a very appealing tool for them.
Yeah, totally.
And small studios, because like I don't think studios can afford having 5 Maya licenses every year, because that stuff is not cheap.
No, yeah, so totally. And then if you want to like buy any other kind of license for any other tools, it's just. Man, it just starts to add up really fast. Don't
even get me started on Nuke. Like anything from the Foundry, like Mari and Nuke, it's so expensive. It's prohibitively expensive, actually. Right. So like you have to find alternatives, because like yes, like the Foundry knows that they are the king. They know that Nuke had no competitor. So they just price gouge everyone.
That sounds about right. That's what Autodesk was doing as well. We bought all the competition.
Yep. But now, I mean, Blender's catching up now, like in terms of actual modeling packages. Blender, it's a very, very, very attractive package right now.
Yeah, and it's nice that it's not owned by Autodesk. So that.
Yeah, it's 100%.
Yeah, that they're not going to screw it up yet.
Yeah, until Autodesk buys them or something.
Yeah, exactly.
But then again, like who owns Blender? Like I know it's open source, but like surely it has to have an owner of sorts.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know how that works.
There's been some big questions about, can Blender always be free, or will there be fees?
I hope so. Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where like this is why we can't have anything nice. So someone's gonna ruin it for everyone else.
Yeah, it's like that's just too valuable to have free. Let's just buy it and then sell it. Isabel. Oh, it says our worst render time this week was 5 hours a frame on 32 cores. It's not even 4K. Boy.
Ouch. That is pretty painful. Yeah, that's
doing the math on that one. Boy, oh boy. Gotta have a lot of machines.
Yeah, you need to turn down those samples. Kind of like we'll denoise it in post. Like, oh, we've done that so much. Like, Or sometimes, like, especially when you're doing like interior rendering, where it's just always going to be noisy, because interior renders are always like all about the indirect lighting, right? And indirect lighting is expensive. It's hard to get a clean render. So often it was easier to render 5 renders and average those together to denoise, as opposed to rendering one super high sample clean render. So weird times. I don't miss those days.
Sean's divorced Maya. Wow, he's really moved over to Blender. Way to go, Sean.
Good for you, buddy. Good for you.
That's impressive. I don't think it's hard to do. It's hard to switch software. It's very frustrating.
It is. I think my biggest struggle with Blender is the navigation, because Blender still has like the typical, I think you have to navigate with like the middle mouse button instead of like Maya. I love the navigation of Maya, where it should hold everything happen with the Alt button, and that's it. You just hold the Alt button, everything is done with the mouse. Sure. It just works really well. And then Blender comes along and just does whatever the heck that is. And it's just, there's a learning curve.
Yeah. Isabel's using 2019 in her with her studio, so that's pretty impressive. That's getting close to the latest.
Yep. It's better than 2017 because I know that was a big dumpster fire.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, that's what I remember. Like Epic for years were working in 2016. I guess they didn't want to get to the 2017 version.
Oh, that makes sense. Because 2017, I remember like some people at my studio had upgraded, and they were all the way the one just yelling constantly, like, "It's a freaking Maya!" Just like yelling. And everyone who hadn't upgraded was just like, I'm okay.
Yeah, no kidding. Oh man, nobody likes that.
Are you a Maya guy or are you a 3ds Max guy?
I mean, for years in the industry, we were using 3D Max. So,
right.
I originally in college I learned Maya, and then my first job we were in 3D Max. So then I just became really comfortable in Max. I was doing scripts and all sorts of stuff, and then for quite a long time. And then we moved in at Rocksteady. We moved from basically the animation team was in Max, but then our cinematic team was using Motion Builder. So then I became really familiar with Motion Builder.
Right.
But then when I started teaching at CG Spectrum, I had to go back to Maya. So it's like, what was Maya again? How do you use Maya again?
Yeah, definitely. I know it's a learning curve. Like I was actually I learned what a vertice was in Maya. Like I started like Maya 4.5 when I was like 12 years old. Because I had a book on it and just dabbled in Maya on my parents' computer. But then I learned proper 3D on 3ds Max and used that for like 6 or 7 years. And then when I moved to film, we used Maya, and I haven't gone back. Like going back to 3ds Max now, I'm just like, ew, gross. What is this?
Me too. I can't comfortably go back. It's just
no.
I have it installed, and I sometimes I go back there to like open assets or something, but like I go in there, I'm like, I forget how to do anything, and it's like so clunky again.
I mean, then again, like. There's lots of things in 3ds Max that I loved, like modifier stacks. I love those. Exactly. Proper symmetry, like Maya doesn't have a proper symmetry. Like it's just really, really bad. And 3ds Max was just like, so good.
It's true.
It just worked.
It's funny how there's some tools that you're just, especially when you switch softwares, you're just like, I remember going from 3D Max. I can't remember what it was. Maybe it was something to do with symmetry. I forget. But it was like it was like moving an object to another object, like position constraint or whatever.
Right.
And it was like, you go to Maya and you're like, what do you mean you have to actually make a constraint and then delete the constraint? That is the worst workflow ever. And then finally, like later on, they made a little option where you can like align to another object. But
right.
It's just funny how when you switch softwares, you realize like you're relying on a tool and they just don't do it that way. And you're just like, why not? That just makes a lot of sense.
Yep. Yeah, it's I still miss some parts of certain packages, right? I think the only package I just love and have just never hated is ZBrush. And ZBrush, I think it's the single reason why I'm still doing CGI today.
Wow.
It's like, because like I did take a break for a while from CG, like I needed a break. I went traveling, went backpacking for a whole year. And when I got back, I'm like, I really miss ZBrush. Like I should get back into this. This was great.
Wow.
And
really?
ZBrush is just so much fun. I think it's come so far as well, and now its modeling tools are awesome, and it's just so much fun to work with. Like when I have like an asset to make in ZBrush, I'm like, yes, just make myself a big pot of coffee and just like, it's gonna be the best day.
Oh man, that's amazing. Now I feel like I should learn it. It's like, what am I missing?
It's really cool. It has a learning like Blender or not like Houdini or whatever. ZBrush is weird.
Yeah,
it's got quite the learning curve.
Exactly.
And like, for example, Control S does not save your project. it does not save your tool.
Really?
So you have to save it as a tool. At least it's changed now. Now Control S does it, but before, like a few years ago, Control S only saved like your viewports. And not your actual model. So many students would come to me like, William, what happened? Why is my project gone?
Why do I have all these screenshots? Doesn't mean nothing.
It opens up. It basically saves a still image of your sculpt. It's like
it's like a tease. Like, this is what you could add if you saved it.
Yeah.
Oh man.
So it's lots of weird things like that. So it's kind of. it's weird, but it's just so much fun. There's nothing that comes close. And Blender sculpting tools are getting very good, and ZBrush needs to be careful because they may get dethroned in the near future if they're not, if they don't stay, what's the word? Innovative, I guess.
Right, innovative, yeah. Immensely competitive.
Yeah. And then again, it's getting to the point where, like, how much more innovative can you get? Like, we're just making 3D models, right? Like, all the tools that need to be made are made. At some point, you just kind of need to not suck at the job, and you can't expect like a make pretty button.
That's true. That's true.
So yeah, it's the UI is also super weird. Like everything in ZBrush is just different for the sake of being different. It's just nothing like even like the like file save as. That's different. You don't do it that way. It's just like this small or file export. There's none of that.
Right.
So it's a very, very strange thing. But once you kind of worked it out, it works pretty well. Yeah,
no, that's what I've always heard, and it's always been like, oh man, if I really want to learn it, I got to sit down and really focus on this. And my background's never really been in modeling, so it's never really been that interesting to figure it out. But
right.
I've sort of made a subconscious decision. Okay, I'm just gonna let that one be. I'll just let other people figure that out. I don't need to.
I don't blame you. So. I do not blame you. It's weird.
Yeah.
And for me, I feel the same way about animation. For me, it's like animation, like, yeah, I'm just gonna, let someone else take care of that for me. just make this guy move, and thanks very much.
Just make it work.
And like Mixamo is a godsend to me.
Yeah.
Because like you just throw your model in there, it auto rigs it and gets an animation. It's like, oh, cool, great, done.
Yeah, it's true, and it doesn't cost anything, which is like amazing.
Which I'm like, how did they make their money? Like, this is suspicious.
Yeah, well, Adobe is obviously, they've got some software tools that they have that are sort of animation things, so they must be like parlaying that so that you buy their software. I guess, I don't know.
Maybe, I don't know. It's just like, for a fact that Adobe is not doing this, giving this for free out of the goodness of their heart.
Yeah, not at all.
It's like there's something weird going on here. I'm not sure what it is, but like. What are they doing with all these models that we're uploading to it for it to be auto-rigged? Are they like stealing those and reselling them?
They have this.
I don't know. I didn't read the terms of service, the terms of use.
No, that's true. It's an interesting point, actually. I don't know.
So,
but I remember when
we really went off on it. Go ahead, sorry.
I remember when they bought it. They bought Mixamo, and it was like, oh, are they gonna start charging for this? Or maybe they made it free. I can't remember how that worked, but it was like, it was just really neat that it was like, wow, man, all these animations and rigs, and then you can put your own stuff in there, and it's like, oh, that's free. It's crazy.
Yep.
No.
It's good times.
Yeah.
Good time.
There's a lot of conversation
about Mixamo.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, about Mixamo.
About is doing Mixamo to Maya to Marmoset doable? Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I would probably switch that around. I would probably do Maya to Mixamo to Marmoset. Just because, like, usually you need a model before you animate it, right?
Yeah. Wait. So what was your order? Mixamo.
Yeah, so the question from Pietro was, is doing Mixamo to Maya to Marmoset doable?
Yeah. Sounds like the right order.
Yeah, I would probably do Maya first, then Mixamo, depending on your project, right?
Because you got to create it. So you start with you got to make the mesh, and then you use Mixamo to get your mesh rigged, and then you can put it through Marmoset. Oh,
okay, then yeah. Then
unless I'm misunderstanding.
Model. Yeah, so you just updated it. Model to Mixamo to Maya to Marmoset. Like, I don't even know if you'd need Maya at that point.
Yeah, if you finish your model. Oh, I guess to animate it, maybe. Oh, no, unless you're using animations for
That's what Mixamo's for, right?
Yeah.
So, I guess you blend animation together and such, so.
I was trying this plugin recently about how to convert your Mixamo rigs to a animatable rig in Maya. And the plugin, we were trying it in one of the open sessions, and it was doing a great job of like getting all that skeleton, put it into a control rig, but it put everything sideways. And I never bothered to go back to figure out why everything was sideways. But it was like, that sounded so cool. It was such a great concept. But because it's all sideways, I have never been able to like advise it to anybody, because it's like, oh yeah, that's going to be really disruptive, having your whole control rig sideways.
How much you want to bet that has to do with like a Z up or a Y up thing?
I bet it is. That's what my first thought was too.
Yeah, I mean that's just it's so weird. Like Z up makes the most sense to me,
right?
In my mind, because like when you're in school, you're learning about sine curves, and it's on a paper on your desk. And you've got the X and Y, and then Z is the up, right? Like that's how I've always imagined it. And then of course you've got the people that know Z is the depth. Like I'm like,
Oh,
no,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, I can see that argument too. X and then your 2D plane. Yeah,
it just depends on how you visualize that plane, right?
Yeah.
So that's caused so many issues in every production.
I remember that the original art toolkit, which comes from Unreal, which is your rigging tool set, and they had this whole thing where they would like dynamically, because you'd be letting their system sort of automate it. One of the things they would do would be switch your whole viewport, your whole world, so that the Z would be up, so it would match Unreal, so that you'd have it the same up axis. But it was so confusing because it'd be like you'd do anything else and everything was all sideways. So you're like,
oh no.
You'd have to tell all the students to be like, okay, well now you've got it all. The Z is wrong, so now you go Y up and then Z up, and then you're exporting. You're like, make sure it's the Z up and Y up, and it was just
how to make students hate 3D 101.
That's what happened too. They would all be like, I think your tool set broke my Maya, and how do I turn it off and uninstall it? I'm like, darn.
Oh no. Fortunately, like I haven't had to worry. That's like usually a programmer's problem. Like I just send the models. That's what's beautiful about modeling. It's just vertice positions, right? It's just like done, model's done. Just deal with it now.
Yeah, that's right.
You can take care of this crap.
You have them. You have it.
All my job is just to make this look pretty. Nothing more. That's all.
Exactly. It's kind of a nice position to be in, actually.
Yeah, definitely. That's why I liked being a lighter until I realized that lighting is not just about placing lights. When, like in film, when we say a lighter is also going to be taking care of the rendering process, and that's a whole can of worms. So I'm like, oh yeah, I like placing lights. I like making my shots look pretty. But then I realized, I have all this other list of responsibilities that I didn't really know about.
Nice.
I mean, pretty much. Like I've done my fair share of render wrangling because of that. Especially in smaller studios where you don't necessarily have a dedicated render wrangler.
Oh, yeah.
So like I've mostly worked in smaller studios my whole life. And yeah, having to wrangle your own renders constantly is just kind of a nightmare. You're just praying that you don't get an email in the middle of the night like, oh, render failed, out of memory. It's like, crap, like, no.
Yeah,
because it would be synced up with our farm, right? So I would get email notifications if a render crashed or something. It's like, so it's just like this, again, ball of anxiety in your chest. Just like, I hope my phone doesn't just like buzz.
I want to sleep tonight. Please let me sleep tonight.
Yeah. So
I guess that's the problem when you're at the end of the pipeline, eh? Like as a lighter, you're the last one to touch it. And so
I mean, fortunately, there's like the compositors and colorists after me, right? So there's always someone even further than me.
That's true.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm not those guys because they're the ones who are actually the heroes of production. Because the stuff that they can pull together and just kind of push through so fast is amazing. Like the times that we've had like FX renders fail. And then compositors like, okay, you know what? I'm just gonna buy like some kind of like FX pack that they can just slap on like with alphas and stuff, and just composite it into the frame, into the shot easily, and poof, done. Instead of depending on proper FX from Houdini, right? So they'll just buy something online, just like, oh, here's an explosion pack that I bought, and just plug it in and composite, grade it in correctly, and done. So yeah.
Exactly. Isabel says we don't have it linked to our email yet, but the artist will get a message from me if there's an issue. A message from me at 10 p.m. is a bad sign.
No, people must hate you so much. It's like, freaking Isabel. God, I just wanted to sleep tonight.
That's always going to be a fun anxiety to get those messages.
Yep. Yeah, that Isabel position sounds like the guy who gives out parking tickets. Like, it's a very thankless job.
Yeah, that's true, right? I'm so sorry, but
you were in the wrong here.
Sorry.
Yep.
Apologize in advance. All right, well, we're all out of questions. If anybody has any more questions they want to bring up or anything to talk about, feel free. Yeah. But
we've had quite a fair bit of comments there. Like, for example, Abu asked, like, is Modo used in the industry? And I think it depends on the studio. I think Modo. Have you used Modo much?
No, I haven't. Just enough to know what it is, and then I kind of move on.
Right. I think it depends on the studio. Like some studios are very liberal in what software you want to use. Basically, as long as you're able to deliver like an FBX file at the end of the day, they really don't care if it's 3ds Max or Maya or Blender or Modo. Some studios are very software dependent, so like everyone has to use 3ds Max or you're fired. It's one of those things. It really depends on the studio. I think as long as you're able to deliver the results,
right,
then I think go for it.
And I think that's an interesting point too, is just the fact that you can have technically a studio environment where, the software used isn't necessarily specific. I mean, if you don't have this giant tool set of in-house tools that you're trying to rely on, I suppose, but you could, in theory, have like people working in Blender and all sorts of stuff. And as long as you get the product in the right form for the next person in the pipeline, then doesn't really matter where it came from.
Exactly. I think it's mostly the case for like people who are earlier on in the production. Like for example, like Tyler here says, like concept artists use Modo, sorry, because it's, there's lots of really powerful tools in Modo that really help concept artists. So they're so early in the production that they don't depend on anyone else. It really doesn't matter what tools they use. Same thing with modelers. As long as you're spitting out a model at the end of the day, then it's fine. Things start getting a little bit messy when you're kind of in the middle of the production. You're past that stage. You're in the rigging phase or the animation phase or even the texturing phase, because it depends on UVs, right? You want to have a model that's, you want to have clean UVs and not have to jump between 5 different packages for UVing. Yeah. So the earlier on you are in a production, the easier it is to kind of use whatever tools you want to use. And then later on, it gets a little bit like, no, you kind of have to stick within this confined box.
Bring up new variables, please. Yeah.
No, exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. How many CPU cores do I need?
All of them.
All of them. From
as many as you can get. I mean, you can never have too much, especially if you're CPU rendering. Like for Unreal and stuff, you don't really need. I think you only need a good processor as long as you're not bottlenecking your CPU. As long as that's fine, then you don't need a better processor, right? Like you don't need to get a Threadripper or like the most expensive Core i9. I think as long as your GPU is not bottlenecking, you're fine. If you're doing CPU rendering with an offline renderer, have as many CPU cores that you can possibly get your hands on. That's going to make your life a lot easier.
I was fielding a question like that for somebody, Kirsty actually, who sometimes joins our stream, and she was going to buy a new machine and she was trying to figure out, do I get the CPU with this many cores or that many cores? And it's like, well, it really depends on what it is you're planning on doing and where your output is supposed to be. And for me personally, like coming from animation, more cores doesn't necessarily do me any good because it's a lot of stuff is just single threaded. So it's like you can only really rely on that first core to actually get the job done. And all the rest of them are just going to be sitting there not doing anything. So you have to make sure whatever it is you're using is actually maximum and utilizing these multi-cores.
Like ZBrush, for example, doesn't necessarily need multi-threading. It just needs a very fast single core. So it actually has if you have fewer cores and a faster clock speed, that's better for ZBrush than having like 64 cores or something. So it really depends on what you're going to be using more. There's no one tool that's going to do everything perfectly. Of course, if you get like a Threadripper, which are super expensive, you're not going to have any problems regardless of what you do. But those are not very affordable. They're very expensive. Like they're like thousands of dollars for the CPU alone, and then you need to get the motherboard for that CPU, which is not cheap either. Again, what kind of GPU do you need? That's kind of the same answer. It really depends on what you need.
Because you can buy the most expensive thing, but if you're not actually doing something that utilizes your GPU, you're just wasting your money because it's just going to sit there taking up space and not doing anything. So
that money would be better utilized in either more education, buying better courses or something, so you can actually put your PC specs to use.
But if you are doing something that does require your GPU, that extra speed does actually really make a difference, and it's quite
of course.
Like sometimes, people are using laptops and their onboard video card is just not going to handle basic stuff. And it's your video card is just not got enough video memory to handle anything.
Yeah. Or if any, like sometimes it's just like, like the Intel Iris stuff. I don't think it had any VRAM, or maybe it uses the actual RAM of your onboard RAM as VRAM, which is really bad. It's not very fast. It's slow. Not recommended.
You really see the sacrifice for sure. May I ask what was the poly count? I know you're on now free from the poly budget world. Sorry to bring up bad memories for the master. The Master Chief model you made.
Yeah.
I watch that video
you.
every 2 to 3 days. Oh my goodness, inspirational.
Thanks so much. So you're gonna laugh. This is actually a model that I got from a friend of mine, so I didn't make it myself. I got it from a friend who got this model from 343 Industries, and I think originally it was like 4 million polys, and so I had to spend like a day or two kind of like bringing it down a little bit because like it would just insanely dense. It would basically just subdivide it like 3 or 4 times. So literally, it was a sub-D modeled mesh, and they just like subdivided it like 5 or 6 times, and then just like collapsed that modifier stack and just bake that smooth. So I had to spend a few days like using with the help of ZBrush, because ZBrush can rebuild subdivision, which is a really nifty tool. So that helped a lot. But so I brought it back down to like 2.5 million, which is still really high, but Unreal Engine 4 handled it like a champ. So that was not really an issue at all. So like, 2.5 million polys on an animated model was, it worked pretty well.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Unreal handles polys very, very well now, even in Unreal Engine 4. Like, don't be afraid of throwing polygons at it. It handles it.
That's right. And I try to explain it. Like, if your silhouette of your object is being sacrificed because you just don't have polys, it's like, just put the polys in. It'll handle it.
Yeah.
You can get it to work. It's like, there's no point in sacrificing now.
No. I mean, this was back in the day you had to, because polys were really heavy. I remember like in Unreal Engine 3, like we had to I had a character that was like 1,000 polys. And it was not that long ago. Yeah.
No, that's right. It has changed rapidly. I mean, and you still have to be efficient to a certain degree. I mean, if you have this tiny little teacup on the ground and it's like, 100,000 polys, you're like, well, what are you doing? Why does that need to be so many polys?
You have to be reasonable, right? Yeah. Like everything in moderation. And if you need the polygons, or if you have to kind of factor quality versus speed as well. If you just need something fast, sometimes just throwing the dense model, if you don't have time to optimize it or retope or whatever, sometimes just it's enough. Just throw it in there.
Yeah.
But if you want it to run better, that's a different matter. So
yeah, that's true. Tyler says if you want to develop on NVIDIA hardware ray tracing as a target, you want at least 2000 series card. UE5 software ray tracing is marketing that making it feel a little silly.
Oh, probably making that feel a little silly. Yeah, I totally see what you mean. So it's a little bit misleading because when you go to like ray trace, like reflections and stuff, it's like now it says like deprecated. Like ray tracing is deprecated in the project setting, which is a bit misleading. I think it's just because Lumen right now in its current state uses software ray tracing. That being said, I don't think that ray tracing is going to be gone. Like ray tracing is still going to be very, very, very useful, especially if Unreal decides to improve its path tracer. Because I don't know if you people have noticed, but Unreal doesn't have a proper path tracer built in, and which basically makes it behave like an offline renderer. And ray tracing will make that process much, much faster. So having a 2000 series or a 3000 series card is still going to be extremely beneficial. Even other tasks, like other programs use their RTX chip in the card to improve the speed of your tasks. Like in Substance Painter, baking all those utility maps, like baking curvature, baking AO, those utilize the RTX chip and makes everything bake so much faster. Do you remember, Simon? I don't know if you ever had to bake textures back in the day, but like baking an AO pass on a model would take hours.
Oh, okay. No, I don't remember that being a struggle. I was just going to talk about how normal maps and stuff and the challenge of learning all that and getting that to work. But
no, I haven't played with that though. That sounds awesome.
There was definitely like a whole time frame in the 2008 where it was like normal maps is a thing and you can do it, and then it was like, how the heck do you make normal maps? And then it was like,
sorry, normal maps. Yeah, I understood like neural maps. So sorry, I misunderstood. Yeah, normal maps. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I love normal maps. I think to this day they're still awesome.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, they really do. They're great. They're still super functional. But there was this whole like challenge for years and years where people like, magicians would figure out how to make the normal maps look good and not stupid and broken.
That was an art. That was an art form of its own. Getting a clean normal map bake on like hard surface assets was, that was an art form of its own. It was amazing, and I actually enjoyed that process because I understood it, I knew how it worked. And then you become like the go-to guy, like, oh, this guy he knows how to make clean maps,
Right.
and
exactly.
you don't get like that weird rainbow effect on some edges and stuff.
Yeah,
Like,
that's right. And I
but
mean,
now that's kind of
it's a lot
Go
easier now. Yeah, with Substance Painter, you
yeah.
can do a lot of that, and it's just boom, 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 boom. I mean, there's still challenges and things, but it's so much better than it was.
Yeah, and now it actually explodes your mesh properly, right? So you can actually it's on a per piece basis, which is amazing. Because back in the day, if you had a gun or something where you with lots of individual pieces, you had to like explode it, so like make it all the pieces separate, bake each individual part, and then reassemble the whole thing. It was. I want to say it was good time. It was times.
No, it was times. That's for a long time.
Yeah.
And that's transitions just happened so recently too. Like it wasn't that long ago that you were exploding meshes to get your renders or your neural map bakes looked good, and then all of a sudden Substance Painter came out, and it's no wonder it took over the industry so fast. Everybody was like, "What?
Yeah.
You can just do that here?" So, oh my goodness,
Yep.
right there.
That was a game changer for sure.
Yeah.
I think just Substance in general was a game changer, just because just everything just slap it, like being able to paint and see your roughness maps like break up in real time. It's like, what? I don't have to do this in Photoshop now and like save and then update your texture. It's like,
no, that's right. It is interesting when you see the industry shift so quick. It really does make you take a step back and go, wow, that just happened. We just everybody's using new software now, and it's just Photoshop is no longer a thing. It's amazing.
No, sir.
All right. I guess we should wrap it up. We hit the top of the hour. That was a lot of fun. We had a lot of good conversations there to cover.
Sure did.
I got to learn a few things. That's always good. I always enjoy that part.
Likewise.
And thanks for everybody who joined us as well. It was great to see all the comments and the questions. It really makes these streams a lot easier. And I appreciate your time, Will, on joining us. And Will is a mentor with us at CG Spectrum. So he's definitely available to talk to in Slack if you ever want to have a chat with him. But so you'll probably see him again in the future. We'll probably either do something like this, or maybe you'll do one of these Unreal streams and show off some more stuff or whatever. But we'll have lots of opportunity. So thanks again, Will, and
Pleasure's mine.
And we'll leave it there and see you guys again next week.
Take care, everyone.
Take care. Cheers.